May 23, 1934. It's just another beautiful spring morning in Louisiana. On the surface, everything seems as quiet and calm as always, but in the background, trouble is brewing. On a highway near the small town Marsalis, a group of police officers lie waiting for two of America's most wanted criminals. They were preparing for an ambush to catch America's favorite partners in crime, Bonnie and Clyde. The story of Bonnie and Clyde is insane. They were these armed robbers and murderers that were practically escape artists. They had evaded the police dozens of times, traveling across the country robbing people while capturing the hearts and minds of America. So if the police wanted this ambush to be a success, they would have to take them by surprise. Just 2 days earlier, the cops had caught word that the pair was heading to the house of an old family friend, Iverson Meffin. Here was their chance to trap the couple when they least expected it. This was the best chance they had come across in over 2 years, so this time they had to get it right. So the cops came up with a simple plan. They convinced Bonnie and Clyde's family friend Meffin to loan them his car. The cops then parked the car on the side of the road, the same road that they knew Bonnie and Clyde would be taking that morning. And hopefully seeing their friend's car on the side of the road would be enough to make them slow down just enough. And that is when the cops would strike. Everything went just as planned. The cops parked the car on the side of the road while 6 police officers hid nearby. And just as they had hoped, Bonnie and Clyde came driving down the road. As they got closer, they noticed the parked car up ahead. Recognizing it, Clyde slows down and looks out the window. And that was all the cops needed. Within seconds, the cops unloaded their guns into Bonnie and Clyde's car. It sounded like a complete war zone in the middle of Louisiana. And in the end, Bonnie and Clyde's car was hit by around 130 bullets in total. The couple died almost instantly. Bonnie was still holding a half-eaten sandwich as her body slumped out of the car door. Both of them had their guns in hand, but they hadn't even had the chance to fire back. For most criminals, that would be the end of it. The news about their death would fill the headlines for about a week, and soon after that their names would be forgotten. But not Bonnie and Clyde. The moment everyone heard that they had been killed, crowds rushed to see their bullet-filled bodies. It was a spectacle. A mob of people literally chasing after a bullet-torn car with 2 corpses still in it. The crowd got so desperate, so chaotic, that people even started cutting off pieces of their hair and ripping off bits of their clothes to take home as souvenirs. Someone even tried to cut off Clyde's ear as a souvenir. It was madness. These were murderers after all. But no one seemed to care that they had spent years robbing banks, stealing cars, or that they had killed at least 13 people. Thousands of people attended their funerals and mourned their deaths. And today, almost 100 years after being shot to death, we're still talking about them. Movies, music, books, TV shows, YouTube videos. I mean, even their bullet-ridden car is still a major attraction in Las Vegas that you can go see right now. All of this was because Bonnie and Clyde tapped into something special. It was the height of the Great Depression at the time, when 1 out of every 4 people were unemployed and people were desperately looking for something to look up to. Enter Bonnie and Clyde, the romantic, rebellious couple taking their lives and careers into their own hands. And even though today everyone has pretty much heard of the name Bonnie and Clyde, the real story of Bonnie and Clyde is even crazier than you think. My name is Jake Tran. I make documentaries on money, power, war, and crime with my team. Subscribe for more. If you want to win $1,000 cash, you just have to be following me at Jake Tran and you're automatically entered. A few of you have won already. Watch out for fake accounts. I will never message you asking for money. And this is Bonnie and Clyde, America's infamous partners in crime. We might be a far cry away from the Great Depression today, but the financial system today is still pretty messed up. I mean, look at how backwards the process of getting a loan is today. We all need loans so that we can make big purchases like houses and cars. But you can't get a loan unless you have good credits. But in order to build good credit, you need a credit card. But to get a credit card, you need good credits. Are you seeing the problem here? This whole chicken and egg thing used to be a big problem, but thankfully now we have Extra. Extra is the future of building credits, because it's the world's very first debit card that helps you build your credits. Yes, you heard that right, a debit card that actually helps you build your credits. You can even earn reward points and everything just like a real credit card, but without the credit checks, interest, and the risk of burying yourself in debts. And Extra is already changing the lives of over 125,000 people and counting. Here's how it works. First, you go to extra.app/JakeTran with the link below, you sign up for Extra and link your bank account, and then you'll get your Extra card in the mail. Now whenever you pay for something, simply swipe your Extra card just like you would any other card, and Extra will then cover the purchase. They will then auto-pay themselves back the next business day, and at the end of the month, every purchase that you make will be reported back to the credit bureaus as credit-worthy purchases, building up your credit with everything you buy. And you'll get all of this without having to make a deposit or go through any credit checks. This is something that I really wish I had when I was first trying to build my credit, so I'm really proud to promote Extra. So if you want the easiest way to start working on your credit right now, pause the video and go to extra.app/JakeTran with the link below. That's extra.app/JakeTran with the link below. Thanks to Extra for sponsoring this video.
Before the crime spree, before the shootouts, before the infamy, there was just Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. Bonnie and Clyde both had pretty tragic backstories. Bonnie was born in 1910 and lived in Rowena, Texas with her parents, older brother, and younger sister. Her life was fairly well-to-do until her father passed away when she was only 4 years old. Faced with no other choice, the family moved to a poverty-stricken neighborhood in Dallas called Cement City to live with Bonnie's grandparents. Even though she had a rough start, Bonnie was still seen as a good girl. She was a smart student who earned honors, and she was particularly interested in poetry and literature, a passion that would continue even during her criminal career. Bonnie loved music and performing on stage. She even participated in school pageants and sang Broadway hits at talent shows. Bonnie loved movies and would often tell her friends they would see her name in lights one day. Only about an hour away from Bonnie's home in Cement City, a young Clyde Barrow was growing up, but he didn't have nearly as nice of a reputation. Clyde was born in Talico, Texas, a little over a year before Bonnie. He was the fifth of 7 siblings born to a very poor, almost destitute family of farmers. They were so strapped for cash that the family spent a few months living in a wagon and then later, a tent. When Clyde was 12, they gave up on farming and moved to West Dallas where his dad opened a gas station. Like Bonnie, Clyde also loved music from an early age. He taught himself how to play the saxophone and guitar, but he didn't have the good grades or promising future that Bonnie did. From the very beginning, he was your typical bad boy, thanks mostly to the influence of his big brother Buck. The brothers started out with small crimes, petty theft and things like that, but soon they dropped out of school and found their criminal forte: grand theft auto and armed robbery. In 1926, at the age of just 17, Clyde was arrested for the first time. At the same time, an almost 16-year-old Bonnie was preparing to get married to one of her classmates, a guy named Ray Thornton. And it wasn't long before they both dropped out of school and got married. But looking back, it seems Bonnie had a thing for bad boys. Her new husband, Roy, was almost never at home, and just over a year after getting married, he was arrested for robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Bonnie and Roy never actually got divorced, but they never spoke or saw each other again either. Down on her luck, Bonnie ended up moving in with her grandmother and got a part-time job as a waitress to support herself. She would write in her diary about how lonely and sick of her life she was. She craved something more, something better, and so did Clyde. But just as they were making their way into adulthood and hoping life would get easier on its own, all their best intentions and biggest dreams came crashing down around them. It was the beginning of the Great Depression and the beginning of Bonnie and Clyde's infamous partnership. The Great Depression took its toll on America pretty quickly. In the wake of one of the country's most turbulent financial crises, Bonnie lost her job waitressing and life was looking worse than ever. And that's when it happened. 19-year-old Bonnie was hanging out at her friend's house in West Dallas when 21-year-old Clyde Barrow walked in. It was love at first sight. Bonnie and Clyde bonded over their shared ambitions. More than anything, they both craved fame and something more than the poor, low-class lives they were destined to live. But given Clyde's criminal streak, their relationship would have to jump some hurdles first. Only a few weeks after they met, Clyde was arrested on multiple counts of car theft and robbery. He was sentenced to 2 years at Eastham Prison Farm. But unlike her husband, Bonnie thought Clyde was worth waiting for, and not even prison could stop their romance. In fact, Bonnie looked at it as just another challenge to overcome, and the best way to do that was obviously to break Clyde out of prison. So during one of her visits, Bonnie managed to smuggle a gun to Clyde. Back then, prisons weren't exactly high-tech buildings with cameras and guards on every floor. And Eastham Prison Farm, where Clyde was being held, looked like nothing more than a really big farm. So a gun was more than enough help for Clyde to escape. and he even got a few prisoners out with him. Unfortunately, it only took a week before they were recaptured. This time, an extra 14 years of hard labor was added onto his sentence. But instead of breaking his spirit, this only made Clyde more desperate to get out of prison. During his time in Eastham, he was starved, abused by guards, and allegedly assaulted by other inmates. Clyde was just about to try his most daring escape plan yet, when his mother worked out a deal with a judge and somehow got him out on parole. He was free. Here was his chance to get back on the straight and narrow. There was just one problem. When Clyde got out of prison, he was absolutely sure of just three things. He was in love with Bonnie Parker, he was nowhere near the end of his crime spree, and he would rather die than go back to prison. It didn't take Clyde long to return to his old ways. Like most people sent to jail, he came out a more hardened criminal than he went in. There weren't exactly a lot of job options for an ex-jailbird during the Great Depression, and Clyde figured that by robbing and stealing, he was just taking what he deserved. But the government owed him for letting him rot in jail. But this time, he was going to be more calculated. He started putting together a group of thieves and criminals that would eventually become known as the Barrow Gang, and Bonnie was by his side the entire time. He couldn't bear to be without her, so he brought her along. This was the start of their robbery spree. They were having a grand old time robbing gas stations and small stores to make ends meet. Until April 1932, when one of their robberies went wrong. Clyde managed to escape, but Bonnie was caught and put in jail for 2 months. But in typical 1930s fashion, when a grand jury deliberated her case, they came to the conclusion that a woman would never participate in a crime voluntarily. Obviously, she had been forced by the gang. So, she was released and immediately went running right back to Clyde. And let's be honest, no one really cared about Bonnie and Clyde when all they were doing was running around stealing things and holding up tiny stores. But that all changed in the summer of 1932. Clyde and one of his gang associates were in Oklahoma when they were approached by a sheriff and his deputy. Without any warning, Clyde and his friends started shooting. The sheriff was killed, the deputy was injured, and Clyde Barrow was officially a cop killer. This was a much bigger deal to law enforcement, and it marked the beginning of Bonnie and Clyde's life on the run. Over the next 2 years, they became famous for evading arrest. Every time they managed to get away from the police by the skin of their teeth, it only made them more well-known. By the following year, Bonnie and Clyde were starting to become household names. In April of 1933, cops found out about an apartment where the gang had been hiding. They surrounded the place and a shootout went down. But even with all the bullets flying around, Clyde just dove through the garage door, past the cops, and escaped. Inside the apartment, the cops found a bunch of Bonnie's poems and rolls of undeveloped film. Pictures and words that would go on to be famous for nearly a century. This new evidence told a compelling story. 2 criminals in love, fighting against the world. Police quickly slapped their photos on the couple's wanted posters in the hopes that more people will recognize them. But that only made them more famous than ever. Suddenly, the image of Clyde being a ruthless gang leader and Bonnie as a cigar-smoking, gun-wielding sidekick was front-page news, and people loved it. It was cool and sexy and totally different from most people's reality during the Great Depression. Even if they were committing crimes and killing people, America was entertained. Bonnie and Clyde were the Great Depression's Robin Hood figures, stealing money from the man, giving the system the middle finger, although they never gave any money back to the poor. But for Bonnie and Clyde, the high was never meant to last. Bonnie and Clyde didn't mind killing people if they had to, but they didn't like murdering just for the sake of it. It was more like if they didn't shoot their way out, they would end up in jail or dead. And that just wasn't an option. But they weren't naive to the reality that their spree was unsustainable long-term. Quite the opposite, in fact. In one of her poems, Bonnie wrote, quote, "They don't think they're too smart or desperate. They know the law always wins. They've been shot at before, but they do not ignore that death is the wages of sin." End quote. Quote, "Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury them side by side. To a few, it'll be grief. To the law, a relief. But it's death for Bonnie and Clyde." End quote. It was like she had a glimpse into the future. The only thing Bonnie got wrong was that they weren't buried together against their wishes. On that fateful day, when the couple was ambushed on their way to their friend's house. When everyone pushed and shoved to get a glimpse of their corpses, they were surprised. They didn't see two scary, hardened criminals. Bonnie wasn't even 5 feet tall, and Clyde barely weighed more than 125 pounds. They were small, unassuming, normal-looking people. And that's the thing about Bonnie and Clyde. Most of their glamorous criminal story was just that, a story. Even the photos that had gone 1930s viral at the time were later believed to be all an act. The couple was amused by America's perception of them and took the photos to poke fun at their gangster image. Bonnie didn't smoke cigars, and Clyde was thinking of ending their crime spree long before cops ended it for them. The truth was, neither of them liked life on the run. It was hard, dirty, and depressing. They spent days on end driving around and sleeping in shifts, trying not to be caught. They ate sardines from the can because they couldn't afford much else. They bathed in rivers and rarely, if ever, felt comfortable. To top it all off, the pair wasn't even very good at stealing money. They never got more than $1,500 from their robberies, and sometimes only got away with as little as $80. But that's not the type of story that sells papers. And so, even after they died, the story of Bonnie and Clyde lived on. The couple achieved the fame that they had hoped for. It just wasn't in the way they thought. Even though Bonnie and Clyde died in a shootout, they got off pretty easy compared to some of America's targets. I mean, look at the CIA's Black Site program. The CIA basically used secret prisons to detain people they thought were enemies of the state, and many of the men and women who ended up there were totally innocent. But that didn't stop the CIA from arresting them on suspicion, blackbagging them to secret locations around the world, and putting them through some of the most gruesome, enhanced interrogations that you could possibly imagine, all without ever charging them with a crime. The things that CIA officers would do to prisoners in black sites are sicker than anything we've ever discussed on this channel before. But we know a video that goes into CIA black sites, their enhanced interrogation styles, and why they're probably still happening right now would get demonetized by YouTube in a heartbeat. So, that's why we've released it as a full-length private documentary that's only available to members of this channel. All you have to do to get access to this exclusive documentary right now, along with other feature-length videos we've already published like MKUltra, Monsanto, Jeffrey Epstein, and Roots of Terror in the Middle East, is click that join button below. People willingly give universities tens of thousands of dollars without them ever teaching you about how the world really works. But when you become a member, you'll get access to all this insider info for only $5 a month. And there's a refund policy too, unlike most YouTube memberships. So if you join and you don't think it's worth it, email us within your first month of joining and we will personally refund you for your first month. After your first month, there is no refund. Scroll down and click that join button right now.
What's up guys, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you're new here, my name is Jake and this is one of the biggest channels on YouTube for documentaries on money, power, war, and crime. We make multiple videos just like this one every single week for free, so make sure you click that subscribe button below. If you want shorter versions of these videos, you can follow me on Facebook, and for a chance to win $1,000, you can follow me on Instagram at Tran. But that's gonna wrap it up. Stay dangerous out there, and I will see you guys in the next one.